Hi everyone, welcome to Tigner Adventures. My name's David and my wife Ninette and our little cat Tansy. We live full-time in this motorhome that we have right here. And today we're going to be talking about propane. Everyone usually has propane in the rig, and the propane is used for gas for their furnace and for their stovetop, things like that. And so we're going to kind of talk about propane in general and the tanks that are being used, whether you're on a motorhome like we are, or whether you are in a trailer or a fifth wheel, and what the differences are between the two types of tanks. So as you can see, my tank is permanently mounted, and some of the characteristics of a motorhome is that the tank is permanently mounted compared to a bumper pole or fifth wheel, where they just have the little tanks that you can lift in and out, and we're going to talk about those in just a minute. But I want to talk about some of the characteristics of the tank that's mounted here permanently. Now, the rules for this tank, it has a little certification thing right here that talks about when this was put into service, and all that stuff that they have to have stamped on a tank. It tells what size it is. This one's a 32-gallon tank, and so it kind of tells you that, and it's permanent. It can't be taken out, so I can't take it and run over to the propane store to fill it up with propane and bring it back. So if you're parked in a location where you're not going to move for a long time, that can be a little bit of an issue. All right. In our particular case, we're here in Yuma right now, and we're doing a work camp job. And so whenever the tank gets low, we actually pack everything up into the rig as far as putting our awning in and fixing things inside, and we drive to the propane store and we get propane. Now, I did that this last week. We took 28 gallons of propane to fill this up. We were pretty close on empty, and of course it was right when the weather turned cold. So if you notice right here on my gauge here, I have some electronics hooked up here that keep track of this, but it shows my gauge right here too. And these gauges are notorious, no matter what year your tank is, that they don't necessarily always work. All right, and so when I come out here to check mine, it shows right now 40%, and I'm just going to take a little pebble here and kind of tap on it, and see, now it dropped down to about 38. So I've had comments from different people when they've been filling the tank up that, oh wow, your gauge seems to work pretty good. A lot of them don't. It doesn't matter what year your unit is, they don't work necessarily. Now, these parts here can be replaced, so if something's not working, you can always replace it. This is your main filler plug, and if you look at this one, it is fairly new. It doesn't have a date on it, but this tank was actually made back in 1992, and so this has been replaced. And there's a little plunger in there when they put it in that pushes gas in, and then it closes when they take it off so the gas doesn't come back out. And that's how this particular unit works. There's no handle to turn on and off as far like on a little bottle. All right, this is the valve they open up to let the air out as they're filling it up, and then they close that. So this one has been replaced. So at some time that probably leaked, and we have had one time when the guy had trouble when he kept taking it off, it kept leaking, and it just had got something stuck in there, and so he kind of punched it a few times, and then finally it sealed. And that was like, boy, a year or two ago that happened. We haven't had an issue with it since. So it just kind of depends if something was, I don't know, some dust or dirt got pushed in there when he was playing around with it. So anyway, that's how that works. It can be replaced. You do have to take it to an authorized place that will drain the propane off and then replace all the whatever's inside. So right here is our breather hose. This actually just, if there's any excess that's coming out or whatever, or pressure or whatever, it can come out this hose. It just kind of vents over here to the side, and it just really doesn't go anywhere. So, but this little unit here, this is our key, and like that could be replaced. We have also replaced this. It had a little bit of it didn't keep the pressure correct within the rig when we measured it. We're supposed to have 11 inches. They do the measuring on this, instead of being like air pressure, it's actually done by water column inches, and it's supposed to have 11 water column inches of pressure, and it kept changing and things, and so we went ahead and replaced this regulator right here. And then this is our on and off, so we can turn it off and on. A key thing to note also, you'll hear a lot of people talk about oil in their lines. Now, I was talking to one guy, he says, yeah, we've had issues with our rig before. This is when we were first looking at buying something, and it had oil in lines. We had to have the lines all drained, and so it's because you get bad propane. And it's like, really? I didn't know that. And so he's telling me this big old story, which was a bunch of poppycock, because that's not true at all. Propane is a very, very clean gas, a very clean burning, and it does not have oil in propane. There's no oil in there. It's not being put in there. The way oil gets into your lines is these type of lines right here, rubber lines. They put a cheap rubber line on here, and the propane will leach the oil out of the rubber, and that's how you get oil into your lines. So don't believe all that crap. He was just telling me, he was just giving me a load of crap, trying to sell me this RV, saying, oh, it works good now. Well, he says, you know, anyway, I don't know. I just went off on a big old thing that it was hard to believe, and since then I've done a lot of digging and found out that that's just not true. So just be aware of that. These rubber lines that you have need to be rated for propane, and then they don't leach oil into the system. So if you got oil in your lines, it's because someone's not putting the right products back where they're supposed to be. So so don't believe any of that kind of stuff. So just maybe like my one video where I said if the walls were waving, run. Maybe if they're not taking care of it that way, you wanted to say, forget this unit, I'll go to something else. But anyway, that's kind of the characteristics of this. Now, propane tanks that are on your rig like this do not have to be recertified every so many years, okay? Bottled ones, we're going to show you in a minute, do. And these don't. Basically, the technician that's going to fill it up, the basic guidelines is if it looks okay, then we're going to put gas in it. And that's basically all the criteria is on these particular tanks. So don't believe somebody if they say, hey, I need to recertify your tank or something like that. That is not true when it comes to a coach. They are under a different classification than what trailers are, and you know, so you don't have that issue. You know, bottles that are removable have a whole different classification than these. So just be aware of that. Now some units, like a friend right here just a couple ways over, he's added a piece here that I really want to add, and if you see here, this is a picture of the piece I want to add in here. Now the reason I want to do that is because when I add that in here, then I have a place where I can hook my 5-gallon tank up, and you know, I can fill this up completely with propane, shut this off, and run my unit off of bottles. And the advantage to that is, especially in his case, he was up in California where they were having a lot of fires. The advantage to that is you just unhook that bottle. You can even leave it there and take off, and whenever he gets, he's got a full tank of propane to be able to take care of himself, you know, so it's kind of an emergency type thing. The other thing is that he doesn't ever have to drive his rig anywhere to get it filled. He just takes the bottle in and gets the bottle filled and then brings it back. Now, there is services that go around and fill up your propane, and the place that we got this filled up, they do come here into the park and fill it up also, but it's $1.10 more per gallon. So that, I just told you, I took 28 gallons, you know, so for $30, I can put everything away in my rig and drive it down the mile that I got to go to get propane. I mean, it's not that big a deal. I do like to drive my rig every 3-4 weeks anyway. I like to get things moving around, the engine run a little bit. I don't like things sitting around for 6 months that we've got a work camp here. I don't want to leave my rig just sitting here 6 months. I want to make sure it's still moving. We run off of our inverter all the time. We're running off our batteries all the time. We're running off just like we were boondocking, because when we leave here, I want to make sure all that stuff's working. I don't want to get out on the road and have a surprise. That's just me. You might do it a little differently, and that's fine. But that's just things to kind of keep in mind, and taking care of your propane is really, really important. Now, up here, you'll see that this rubber hose goes to this pipe up here, and this pipe actually goes over to the other side of my rig, and I have a bunch of copper tubing hooked there, so there's a lot of different fittings. Now, what I use is, if you look here, I have this bottle of soapy water, and I actually spray that onto these fittings. And at the time that this was leaking, I was having issues here, I also found out that a valve on my refrigerator was leaking, and Ninette kept saying, you know, I smell gas, and I'd say, you don't know anything, you know, that the refrigerator just started, so it just poofed out some little gas, and that's what you're smelling. Well, come to find out, she was right. And when I had this tech come over that I work with, I now have the gauges to, you know, check water column and all that kind of stuff, because we were checking some things, and he showed me some stuff and kind of trained me on how to do that. And what we found out, or what he told me, was women have a lot keener nose than men. And women can always start smelling propane, especially when you get to the end of your tank. When it's getting empty, it'll put out a little bit different odor, and they can smell that difference, where guys typically don't. And it's probably because we just think we know everything, I guess, I don't know. But I wasn't listening to her, and he told me that I need to listen to her, because she knows that kind of stuff. And we do have a propane detector, but it just wasn't enough to really even do anything. It's just every once in a while she'd just smell a little whiff of propane. It wasn't like it was on all the time. It just was just a little whiff here and there. And that's why I thought it was just because the propane was starting up, like when you start up your stove top burner, you know, you turn it on, you get a little bit extra propane there sometimes, and you'll smell that. Well, that's what I thought it was. Well, in her case, she was right, I was wrong. I'm not afraid to admit it. So I need to depend on her more often, because she really had that nailed down. So we fixed that valve just by going around spraying, you know, stuff on there. And then another thing is when we're traveling, we have had one time where we left this valve open and we left our furnace running when we were traveling, and that's because we're traveling through Utah in the middle of December and it was 16 degrees out. I was trying to keep my water tanks from freezing, and so we had heat going in there from the heater. That's the only time we've ever traveled with this on. So people have different ways of doing it. Some like to travel with it on all the time, but you know, if you've ever seen a rig that's sitting on the side of the road burning up, it's because they had a propane leak and something happened and that propane ignited and their rig's on fire. So the safe way to do it is to always turn this off when you're traveling. You're really taking an extra risk if you leave it on all the time, and it's up to you. I mean, it's your rig, it's your life, but I'm just telling you, safety wise, it's better to turn this off and not worry about it. And if I was going to be in that kind of cold situation all the time, I'd actually invest in some, you know, some heaters that I could plug in down there and let them just kind of run and stuff like that to keep those from, you know, freezing up and stuff. So that would be a more safer way of doing it than allowing the propane to run all the time. So we always turn this off. When you go to a station to get filled up, they'll always make sure that you have to turn this off. You have to have all your stuff turned off inside the rig, and animals and people have to exit the rig while they're filling it up with gas, just in case there's some kind of an issue. So that kind of takes care of this little setup here. The next thing we want to talk about is our actual tanks. In this picture, you can see that there are 3 size tanks. So they refer to these as 20-pound, 30-pound, and 40-pound tanks. Now, most barbecuers and little fire pits, things like that, they use the 20-pound one, which is the smaller ones you can see here. The 30-pound is what you'll typically see in the bumper poles and fifth wheels. So let's look at some characteristics of the tank. The first thing I want to point out here is the connector piece here. If you look at this, it's got a little, in my case, I've got a little regulator on there that I can actually adjust out the flow to my little fire pit. That's how most fire pits are set up. But in the case of a trailer, it's just going to be a regulator that actually screws onto the tank. And if you look here on this tank of mine, there's 2 different ways that you can screw a regulator in. You can either do, if it's a righty-tighty type of regulator connection, it'll be a lot bigger and it will actually screw onto the outside of this connection. If it's especially the older style barbecuers and things like that, they actually go on the inside here. So you can see there's threads on the inside. They're a lefty-loosey, so they're a backwards thread. And so you actually push the piece inside here and screw it on. So those are the 2 different characteristics that you need to pay attention as far as the actual tank connection goes. Now, if we look at the side of the tank here, so I'm looking at here on my tank. My tank's a little bit older. You can see here that it's a 17 pound is what they're referring to it as, and propane weighs about just a little over 4.2 pounds per gallon. And so if I look at this tank, there's a couple of things I want to see here first. So the first thing it's showing me on the top here is that this is a 17 pound tank, and the manufacturer date on this tank is February, so 02 of 00, so February of 2000. And then if I go down here on the bottom and look, it's showing that my actual capacity is 4.0 gallons. So they reference this little tank as typically you'll hear it be like 5 gallons, okay, 20 pounds. My big tank on my motorhome, I told you, was 32 gallons, and it was pretty much empty, and all I got in there was 28. Now, the reason for that is because even if this is a 5 pound or that's a 32, whatever, the law, state regulations only allow them to fill them up to 80%. And so that's why I only got 28 gallons into mine, because then I was at that 80% mark, the guy quit filling it. On these tanks, the same thing happens, so you're only going to get the 4 gallons in there instead of the 5. So that's kind of the difference there, why you might get kind of confused on the different terminology as far as them calling this 20 pounds or 5 gallons. It's really not. It's just all that you can get in here is 4 gallons. So, but let's go back to this tank and look at some more characteristics. So that's on this side of the tank. So the manufacturer date, February 2000, and it had a 4 gallon capacity. If I turn this around, there's one major thing here. It says must be requalified within 12 years of the date of the manufacturer. So remember, the date was 2000, and so 12 years after that it has to be redone. Now this is 2022 now, but if I look over here on the left of this tank, this has actually been recertified in 03 of 17. So 2017 it got recertified, and so apparently it sat around because that's more than 12 years. So it sat around, then someone decided to go ahead and recertify it. So now the thing that they do when they're going to actually re-qualify it or recertify the tank is they actually check it for leaks. They checked out the structure of it. Sometimes they may have to replace the actual valve that goes inside the tank because things have changed, rules have changed. They have a little lever inside those that if I was just to take the tank and just sit here and just with nothing on it, open it up, it would detect it as a leak, and it would only let a little bit, it would drop it down so only a little bit comes out at a time compared to just blowing it all out. There's a little lever inside that does that. So if your tank doesn't have that because it was too old, then they would actually replace that whole stem piece in that recertification process and put in the correct thing for safety measures and things that are in effect today, and maybe back in 2000 wasn't in effect. And so those are the things that are actually changing in that case. But as you can see, this tank was recertified in 17. That means that in 5 years, so what's 5 times, or 5 onto 7 is 22. So in March of this year, this tank has to be recertified. And once they, it said that it was good for 12 years, and then you have to go through it and you have it certified. So it was recertified. Once it's recertified, it's actually only good for 5 years. So then every 5 years you have to have it recertified. So it's time for this tank to get recertified here in about 2 months, and or it's time to get another tank. Okay, this particular tank I actually got from one of those places where you go like by Walmart and you swap them out. So I'm just gonna go swap the tank back out again. So they've given me an older one, so when I'm swapping these out, I want to make sure that I'm good, and they go ahead and clean them up and then recertify them again. So now that I brought that up, let me just explain that just a little bit. So you can swap these smaller 20-pound tanks out at different locations, and you'll see those all over the place, gas stations, wherever, and you can swap those out and for a particular price. And if you don't have one, you can buy a brand new one there, whatever the case is. And all they're doing is just keep swapping them. They recertify them, send them back in the cabinet again. Anyway, I hope that kind of helps you out a little bit. There's a lot of stuff with propane that the reason they use propane is because it's a very clean, efficient, clean burning, very good for the environment, a lot better than anything that's gas or diesel oriented. Anyway, I think that's all I have at this point that I can think of that will benefit you, and hopefully it's been of some kind of benefit, and I'm not just wasting your time, because my goal here is to help you out. And so I do appreciate it if you can, let us, make comments, let us know what's going on, what you need to know, and things like that. We will be heading out to Quartzsite next week. This is the Quartzsite's at the end of January, and so next week will be the last week starting of January. So on the 21st, we're headed up to Quartzsite. If you're in that area, and we'd love to meet you, you're going to have to send us an email or text us, whatever, get a hold of us, because we'll have to tell you, it gives you some kind of GPS coordinates as where we're at. So please reach out to us, make any comments on this video. We'd love to hear from you. With that said, that ends this video. So please, hopefully we'll see you down the road, and if not, we'll hopefully see you on our next video. So thanks a lot. Take care.